Hi, this is Rabbi Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Whether you're watching with our friends over at Torah Anytime or wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, as always, it's nice to have you along for the experience. And we have a sponsor for this week's episode. As I've mentioned in past episodes, we were in difficult straits, and Baruch Hashem, a bunch of people have put in sponsorships. And now, finally, we have a corporate sponsor. I've been asking for you. Please come and advertise. Rabbi Orlofsky Show listeners are very, very, very loyal. And I'm sure that they want to come and help you out. So, did you forget filing your taxes April 15th in your pre-Pesach to-do list? Well, have you ever heard of prison? That's not in the end. Did you forget since COVID? Okay. Have you heard of serious prison? The Obama administration? Do your businesses books like a shul banquet hall after a kiddush? Oh my gosh. You know, there are people who don't even have a bookkeeper. They don't have anything. They can't keep track of everything. And this stuff is pretty serious. My father went bankrupt. He had a florist. And at some point he went bankrupt. His accountant said, "You're bankrupt." He said, "How can I be bankrupt? I'm working, hours and hours, nonstop. I'm making all this money." He goes, "Yeah, but your expenses are too high." He says, "Well, that's your job as my accountant to tell me that." So people spend money, they pay bills, they don't know anything. Have you received a notice from the IRS and are so far addressing it by saying a kapitel tehillim? You have to be a really big tzaddik for that to work. Are you all filed and okay, but really want to get out of a guy in the shul's surefire investment by saying, "I'll have to ask my accountant," but your accountant hasn't responded to your messages since you forgot to pay an invoice 3 years ago? In the words of Groucho Marx, when someone suggested something, he says, "I'll speak to my lawyer. And if he tells me to do it, I'll get another lawyer." Do you seek professional services from advertisements on Torah podcasts? Ha ha! Finally, we found some intelligent people. Then do I have a CPA for you? A nice Jewish boy, a CPA. DRS Accounting is proud to sponsor the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Based in Los Angeles, we, the royal we, the editorial we, Daniel Serbin CPA, serve all 50 states for all business, personal, nonprofit, pension plan, and corporate tax returns, as well as tax planning and IRS audits and collection assistant. DRS is for regular small business owners who need some help, looking to organize, save taxes, help grow their business. I have to tell you that people don't realize that they're sometimes overpaying on so many different things. Their accounts are not organized. They don't know the bank owes them money. Bills were paid that they don't know about. Bills should have been paid. They were entitled to discounts, all kinds of different things. Sometimes an accountant comes in and finds out that, in fact, you're owed money. And it's a serious, like I say, from my father's experience, it's important. If any of this sounds of interest, email thehelpfulcpa@gmail.com. The Helpful CPA is the name, right? It's on the screen. Or WhatsApp 747-229-6646. That's 747-229-6646. Operator standing by. That's not in the ad. I just threw that in. Only U.S. taxes. We only speak Ktsat Ivrit and are taking Yiddish on Duolingo. My friends, you're dealing here with an accountant who listens to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show, so you know that he's intelligent. You know that he's creative. You know that he's dedicated. If you need an accountant, and the Ramban holds it's only a mitzvah to daven if you're in an Eis Tzara. And I forgot it is who said it, but if you don't think you're in trouble, then you need to daven the most. Anyone who thinks they do not need an accountant in their life are making a mistake. I found this out dealing with Israeli taxes. when I received a letter from the tax authority here in Israel, and apparently I've been living here at that time for about 30 years, and I had not paid any taxes because I didn't realize that they expected me to. And I got myself a Israeli accountant, and it was complicated. And since then, as every year goes by, he's managed to save me from having to pay taxes every single year. He takes in this tax and this credit, that. It's absolutely amazing. So people who know what they're doing. As Jackie Mason once said, it says, Gentiles can be accountants, but they're no good at it. Because you give them a bill and they pay it. You know, a Jew says, who says we have to pay this? So a good Jewish accountant who watches the Rabbi Orlofsky show, I urge all of my listeners to please go and check it out. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, assuming that applies to wherever you're watching or listening to this. So these things help the, I'm going to say algorithm. I don't even know what that means, but I know that's what they always talk about, the algorithm. So this helps the algorithm. And the more that people hear about it, I every now and then get an email from someone who says, I didn't even know you had this show. We're well into our 6th year. I didn't even know this thing existed. And they start at the beginning and listen to 6 years of Rabbi Orlofsky. And that's too much for me. And I have the voices in my head. You understand? Which is the reason I'm the way I am. So you can imagine. Anyway, okay. I want to pick up on something. We're in Sfiras HaOmer. The month of Iyar is not a sad month. Not to be confused with the donkey, but the same name. Yeah. Iyar is a month of work. It's the only month that is completely Sfiras HaOmer. There's a little bit in Nisan, a little bit in Sivan, but it's all of Iyar is Sfiras HaOmer. And says Gedal Yashar, that's the reason that the mazel for Iyar is a shore. A shore works. Nisan is a sheep. A sheep, you just take care of it. But an ox has to work. And this is the month where we work. And we're working to raise ourselves up from the Memtes Sharituma to be able to receive the Torah. To make ourselves people who are roy, who are worthwhile to be able to receive the Torah, to be a kli that you could be makabel. So I believe the earliest source is Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. But among the Bali Musar, they explain that the concept of Sfiras HaOmer is for us to be metakein our midos, to make ourselves into people who, as I mentioned, can receive the Torah. And so therefore, it's the, as it says in Pirkei Avos, derech eretz kadma l'Torah. It's the humanity that you need before you get the Torah. And one of the reasons that Rachel was willing to give up everything to get Rabbi Akiva to learn Torah is because she saw he had such outstanding midos and such derech eretz. And he says, if you have that derech eretz, if you have that preparation, then Torah will come to you. And she was willing to bet everything on that. Bet the farm, as the old expression goes, because she was so sure. And of course, she was right. So it's during this time that we're supposed to be working on these things. And that's why I mentioned last time that there is a brisa in the 6th parak of Pirkei Avos where it's referred to as the Memches Dvarim. 48 qualities that you need in order to be Kona Torah. And you have to make yourself into this person who can receive Torah. And so these are the different things. I mentioned the first one last week, Talmud, that you have to be a person who is a person of learning, a person who's curious, a person who wants to know. I want to deal with another one. It's interesting in my little shul. I have a little shul. during Pesach, we had a Mincha Ma'ariv, and I would do one of the Memches Dvarim, the one that was appropriate for that day. And someone said to me, maybe you should put out a book of your things. And I said, there are some books out there already. Take a look at them. And if you think that what I have to say is different than everybody else, okay. But otherwise, like I said last time, I don't like to reinvent the wheel. If it's going to serve an essential purpose, then I would invest time in it. And otherwise, I don't want to redo what's already been done there already. Steve Martin, who was a comedian, I think he still is, but his heyday was in the early 70s. It was right after Nixon had resigned. And I know he says something about Nixon, and he goes, I don't want to tell Nixon jokes. It's like so old. It's like telling Ike jokes. For my younger people, Ike was a nickname for General Eisenhower, who was president from 1952 to 1960. And that's ancient history. But, what he's saying is like, it's so overdone. So I don't like to do things that are overdone. But there was one thing that I really, as I came up to this particular meeting, we've passed it by, but, you can join it at any time. That I wanted to speak about was Anova, which is one of the Memches Dvarim. And the reason I want to talk about Anova is because I have so often given the opposite message of Anova on more than one occasion. Because there are any number of shmuzin on Gaiva. And Rav Hutner, already in the 1960s, he says, that was for Europe. In America, you don't have to speak about Gaiva. You have to speak about self-worth. They didn't have a fancy word like self-esteem back then. You have to have a sense of self-worth. You have to know that you're worth something, because there's something about America that just, makes everybody feel like, at least at the time, that they're not worth anything. I was giving a shir in Midos to a group of married women, and when we finished all the introductory classes, so I said, so what meat do you want to talk about? So the first one they said was patience. And I said, well, you're going to have to wait till we get there. The first exercise. Yeah. What else? So someone said Gaiva. And I said, you don't really find Gaiva today. Gaiva is egotism. What you find more often today is egoism. What does that mean? It means there are certain people whose entire emphasis is only on their self, but not because they think they're so much more important, just the opposite, because they are so desperate for attention. They so need to feel like they're important. That's that's not exactly what Gaiva is about. Gaiva is about it's sort of the famous story of the Chazan as he's davening on Yom Kippur. Suddenly he's moved and he turns to the Aron and he goes, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I'm a nothing, I'm a nobody. Right? It's like the Hineni that he says before. I'm a nothing, I'm a nobody. And Lanu Melitz Yosha. Yeah. And the Rav is so moved by this, and he goes and he stands next to him and he goes, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I'm a nothing, I'm a nobody. And the shamish of the shul is so moved by this, and he comes and stands next to them and goes, I'm a nothing, I'm a nobody. And the Rav says to the Chazan, look who's a nobody. You got to be a somebody to be a nobody, There's no trick to being a nobody if you're already a nobody. Guy says to a psychiatrist, I think I have an inferiority complex. He goes, no, you're inferior. It's not a complex. So there are people who, throw around the term, Gaiva, and that's not really where it's coming from. But Anova is very interesting. Because you'd think, okay, the opposite of Gaiva is being an Anav. Anav is translated as someone who's modest, someone who's humble. Yeah. And so you think gaiva is somebody who's an egotist, and an anav is somebody who's, lowly and down and doesn't see himself as anything. So it's for sure not true. Anav is more than just not being bal gaiva. And there's an interesting thing in the Mezuza Sharm where he says you have to remove, in Perek Yud Aleph, he says you have to remove, to become a naki, you have to remove all the bad midos. And one of them he lists as gaiva. And he goes through different forms of gaiva. And he says you can't have any part of it. And you have to completely remove it from yourself, all the different manifestations of gaiva. But the level of anav is all the way at the end of the book. So apparently being an anav is something different than just not being a bal gaiva, because you could not be a bal gaiva and still not be an anav. An anav is a deeper expression. And although I say there's no gaiva today, I don't know if I can really say that so much. I was saying it years ago, but I don't know if I can say it today. Because there is a generation, and this is what we saw in the campus protests. This is what we see, well, not me, but those of you who have TikTok, and you see these TikTok videos and these people who all believe that they are the most important person in the world. Social influencer. I have followers. They follow me. I may not have anything to say. I'll come up with something, some kind of shtick that'll get clicks, that'll get views, I'll do something just to be able to get people's attention focused on me. The Chazal say the Torah is compared to water because when you have a flat surface, the water will always seek out the lowest spot. Water is drawn to the lowest spot, so Torah is drawn to the lowest spot. And therefore the anav will get it. Moshe Rabbeinu, who got the most Torah of anybody in history, who was makabel the most Torah, was because he was anav mikol adam. He was the most anav person in all of history. And because of that, Torah came to him. It's an interesting thing. Let me be clear about this. It takes an enormous amount of confidence to learn Torah. Torah is overwhelming. You get this big book in front of you that's in Aramaic with no punctuation and no vocalization. You don't know the language. You can't read it. You don't know where to stop. And you have to work to tie together word by word, phrase by phrase, sentence by sentence, idea by idea. Because that was too easy for you, we decided to write Rashi in a completely different script than we write everything else in, just to be able to make life more complicated for you, And it's overwhelming. When you look at a page of Gemara, or Mikras Gedolos, you look at a page of Mikras Gedolos, you look at any of these things, it's overwhelming. And you need confidence to be able to go in and do it. And that's not taking into account people who have learning difficulties, focusing problems, and all the other things that go with it to be able to overcome all of it. Not to mention the fact that you have to learn how to think the way the Gemara thinks, which is a form of logic that not everybody is used to. When I first started teaching in Or Sameach, I was teaching in the intro program. And I had a group of guys around the table who were all in top universities. And I was explaining a pretty easy Gemara, and they were just blank looks in their faces. One guy was holding his head. He says, "My brain hurts." I said, "You guys go to big universities. Don't you do anything there?" He says, "No, you have to work hard to get in. And once you get in, nobody cares what you do. They have to keep passing you. It makes them look bad." Yep. But the the fact that you have to have confidence, that's different than lacking a certain humility. And you have to approach Torah with a sense of humility. How many people start off by learning and they say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Or Tosfos asked a question on Rashi and they say, oh, so I guess Rashi's wrong. Baruch Ber, somebody once said to him, the Heilige Rashi, he always said the Heilige Rashi, the Holy Rashi. So someone said to him once, he goes, what's with the Heilige Rashi? Why do you keep saying Heilige Rashi? He said, bring me a knife. And he made a tear in his jacket and he tore Kriya. He says, if you hear somebody insult the Talmid Chacham, then you have to tear Kriya. There's a humility involved. Rabbi Meiselman, who learned many years b'chavrusa with Rosh Soloveitchik. He's brilliant to start with. He spent many years learning. He's a baki in Shas and Poskim, and Rambam, Nosei Kalim. The man, besides being a genius, he knows an enormous amount. He also has a PhD from MIT in physics. Somebody said to him, so can I go to MIT? He says, sure. If you can keep an 8-hour Seder a day like I did, I don't see any reason why not. Brilliant in science and in Torah. And there was a sad chapter in recent Jewish history where some young man who never graduated college, never finished Shas, all by his own admission, decided to become an expert on Torah and science and put out a few books. And Rabbi Meiselman was very upset. And he gave a number of shiurim in his yeshiva responding to some of the things this person said. And the person began attacking him on the internet, saying that Rabbi Meiselman, who knew Shas and Poskim and Rambam and Nosei Kalim, doesn't understand Torah, and saying that this person with a PhD in physics from MIT doesn't understand science. The fact that anybody took this kid seriously, to me, is astounding, absolutely astounding. But you're attacking Rabbi Meiselman? So this inspired Rabbi Meiselman to write a book on Torah and science. And he begins with, before you can approach the topic, you need a sense of humility. You have to be humble. In the words of Dr. Schroeder, who has 2 PhDs in 2 unrelated fields, one of them is nuclear physics and one of them is oceanography. Very smart fellow. He explains how the Chazal understood Einstein's theory of relativity, and he shows it and brings sources, etc. And he does this with a number of scientific things in the Torah. And he would always say, there's a reason they're called sages. Now, here's a fellow who's brilliant. They used to bring him in to supervise nuclear tests, brilliant. And he has the humility to approach the Chachamim and say, listen, if you have a question, before you dismiss it, it would behoove you to have the humility to approach it in the right way. Make sure you understand it. Or as somebody once said, before you knock off a ktsais, you better have spent enough time making sure you understand the ktsais. I was once learning by Choshver Rosh Yeshiva, and in the Maya Makomos, he had 3 ktsais. And it was obvious he was just going to knock them off, And it reminded me of the story my son told me that he heard from his Rosh Yeshiva of Shner Potash, who heard it from his grandfather, Rav Chaim Zimmerman, who heard it from his Rebbe, Reb Baruch Ber, who was there. The first shiur that Chaim Briska gave in Volozhin. And he brings in a ksais that somebody today knocks off 3 of them with the back of his hand. Yeah? And he asks a question. And he says, okay, what do you say? He says he went around the table, and all of the Rosh Yeshiva that people learned today, they were all sitting around the table, and they all gave terutzim. And then Reb Chaim knocks off all of their answers, and he shows how in a few words, because the Ksais wrote very, very brief. He had no choice but to write very brief because he couldn't afford the ink. That's how poor he was. How in a few words, he knocked off all of your answers. So, okay, you got my attention. Yeah. He gave his answer. Everyone said, wow, it's unbelievable. And then he knocked off his answer, and he showed how the Ksais figured out his answer too. And then he gives another answer. Anyway, this went on for 3 hours. And this little Ksais. That was Reb Chaim's first year. Yeah. So when people dismiss things, when I was younger, I don't have any energy anymore now. But when I was younger, and I would have yeshiva guys over for a Shabbos meal, so everyone knew you have to say Dvar Torah. Say Dvar Torah. So this was more or less the word had spread, so people usually came prepared with something to say, you know. I once had this one guy who came, and he had a paper, and he starts to read it, and it's incoherent. I said, I don't understand what you're saying. He reads it again, it's incoherent. I said, where's this from? He says, the Emes Yaakov. I look at the Emes Yaakov, it's all abbreviations in my makomos. It's like, I have to sit looking up each thing to try to figure out what he was saying, why he's bringing. Well, I said, why did you choose this Dvar Torah? And he said, it was the shortest one in the book. That doesn't make it the easiest. But one time a guy comes, he says over an Orach Chaim HaKodesh, and then he knocks it off the back of his hand. Nah, it doesn't make any sense. Ha, ha, ha. And then he sings his own tears. I said, he's called the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, and you're not. So maybe that should give you a moment of humility and approach the Orach Chaim with a little more respect. And so I took a look at the Orach Chaim, and I answered up his question, and I explained to him Shat in the Orach Chaim, and I showed him why the Orach Chaim made perfect sense. But there's this attitude of knocking it off. Years ago, I had the schus to go to Moshav Matisyahu and hear Rabbi Leff on Tisha B'Av morning, where he would speak by the different kinnis. And one of the points he made once was, he says, today we want to, yeshiva guys like to be mavatal. This guy doesn't know how to learn. This guy thinks he's choshev. This guy this guy that. Just knock off people. He says, and the more that you can be mavatal, the more important you are. As the old story goes, there's two ways to build yourself up. You can build yourself up or try to knock everybody else down. And this attitude of knocking everybody else down, that sense of destruction, instead of approaching people with a sense of humility, where Shiva says something, goes, My friend Y.Y. Rubenstein told me a story that Leib Schneeman came to Manchester to speak. And somebody from the local school asked a question. He says, look, we have a principle here that we only take boys from the best families. And if it's not such a good family, you don't take the boy. So Schneeman says, I don't understand. So he says it over again. He says, I don't understand. Okay, so they say it over again. He says, according to your principle, you would have turned down Avram Avinu and accepted Esav. Only from the best families, Okay. So Rabbi YY thought, wow, that was a stinging rebuke. And afterwards, he said to them, so you're going to change your policy? He says, no, he doesn't really understand what's going on here. I told the story once, I had read an article in the Jewish Observer years ago about whether you should teach into English or teach into Yiddish. And they quote Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. He says, if anybody would ask me, I would say it's not worth losing one word of Havana to preserve Yiddish. But no one's going to listen to me. I'm an old man. And that made such a deep impression on me. And I remember I saw one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Yaakov, who I knew, and I said, wow, what a nova. And he looked at me like I was out of my mind. He said, that's not called a nova, that's called realism. He was in touch with reality. He knows that people will listen to the Holy Torah when it serves their purpose. In other words, no use for you. One of the saddest chapters in recent Jewish history were the wedding takonas in the Litvisher community. A whole bunch of Rosh Yeshiva and Gedolim got together and set up wedding guidelines because people were bankrupting themselves. They said, you're only allowed to invite this many people. You're only allowed to have this much music. You're only allowed to serve this. You're only allowed to do that. They had all kinds of rules and regulations. And at the end, there was a little caveat that was added on, a little loophole. But of course, if Rosh Yeshiva feels that for personal reasons, he has to, go to such a chasana, then, the freedom is his. So of course, every rich balabas said to the Rosh Yeshiva, you're going to come to my wedding. And he says, sure. And then everybody else said, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. And the whole thing fell apart. And people continued to bankrupt themselves. Because I don't take it seriously. There was a disaster taking place in girls' higher, middle education here in Israel. The elementary schools go by neighborhoods, and then afterwards, there was only one big Beis Yaakov high school that everybody went to. And eventually, obviously, one size fits all fits nobody. So another school opened in competition. And we're for the elite. And so, of course, I don't want to go to the, Groucho Marx, I don't want to join any club that will have me as a member. So I wanted to go to the elite. So another school opened up and said, we're more elite because we're the frummest of all the basics. We're going to be frummer. And then another one opened. There were a whole bunch of them. And girls were going crazy trying to get into high schools because when there's one place, they have to take everybody. But when there's a bunch of places, go to the other place. We don't have to take you. And everybody... it created disaster. So Rabbi Yoshev at the time in Yerushalayim said, okay, I'm setting up a vad. We're going to assign all of the girls, and every school will take the girls that we give them. So the first break-off school, who held that they were the superior school, said, no, we're not going to take them. We're only going to take the girls we want, not the girls you tell us to take. So Rabbi Yoshev says, then nobody's going to open. Okay. All of Elul, all the girls sat at home. There was no high schools. After Sukkot, Rabbi Yoshev threw up his hands and says, I give up. Do whatever you want. And the situation went back to the way it was. Yeah. Here's a school that considers itself the elite because we teach everybody the importance of following Das Torah. We spit in Rebel Yoshev's face because we know better, because we're smarter. So that sense of a lack of humility, of trying to understand what's being said, what's being done, how to put it into perspective, and just being mavatal. And this is, of course, social media, where people just go on and they attack, and this is the concept of a Twitter mob, and this is the concept of all these different things where people just, I don't care what anybody says. I have my own opinions. I have my own things. I'll do what I want. Someone said to me once, these kids who go off the derech, how you explain it? I said, well, I've spoken to a lot of them over the years, and I find their philosophy can be summed up in 3 phrases. I don't want to. I don't have to. You can't make me. That's it. I spoke once in a program for kids who are off the derech. I came out relatively unscathed, but when they asked me the next time, I said, no, I can't do it. They said, why? I said, I can't teach someplace where a kid could stand up in the middle and curse me out in front of everybody. They said, yeah, that could happen. I said, if I'm going to have any effect on anybody, there has to be a sense of mutual respect. There has to be a sense that you're willing, and it's so funny how you hear people say, oh, people don't respect me. People don't treat me with respect. Ezu mechubad hamechabed es abrius. You want respect? Treat people with respect. But you can't treat people disrespectfully and then complain that people don't respect you. That's not fair. So the humility, the anava, the fact that we can approach life from the point of view of saying, okay, how am I going to learn Torah? Torah is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why there was this thing that started called Bible criticism. I'm going to criticize the Bible. I've heard this expression by Reform rabbis. I can't believe in a God who would. That's the definition of Avodah Zarah. That's idol worship. Idol worship is the ultimate form of gaiva, because God created man in his image, and we create God in our image. They have eyes that don't see, and ears that don't hear, and mouths that don't speak. That's the problem. No, the problem is, why would you make a statue with eyes that can't see and ears that can't hear? Because you made a God in your image. Because at the end of the day, you're God. You're not going to let God tell you what to do. I'm sorry, I can't accept that. So, where's the humility? How are you going to be Makabel Torah? If I don't have the humility, if I don't have the anava to be able to approach Torah in a way where I say, I know this is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I know it makes sense. And if I don't understand it, the chisaron is in me. And people say, yeah, well, I can't accept it, or I'm not happy with that, or, if there was a God, he would never, Wow. A little humility. The Chazal didn't understand science. The rabbis don't understand this. They don't know about that. It's so sad. That's sad. But it's coming from this false sense that I know better. And it's almost impossible to be able to help somebody who knows better than everybody. And it's even harder to help anybody who's mevatel. I feel like I told this story recently, but it definitely bears repetition. There was a fellow who was known to always make fun of the Rabbanim. Made fun of the Rabbanim all the time. Anyway, his daughter's about to get intermarried. And he goes running to the Chavetz Chaim and says, you have to help me. How can I stop my daughter from intermarrying? He says, I'll give you a mashal, says the Chavetz Chaim. There was a plague in the town. And this doctor managed to develop a medicine that could treat it. And he's traveling with his briefcase filled with the medications to be able to bring it to the clinic. And someone robs him on the bridge and steals his case and runs off. Well, he comes to the clinic and there's not much he can do. He can basically sit with them as they die because he doesn't have the medicine. And eventually the guy who robbed him shows up with his daughter who's dying. And he says, you have the medicine. Where's the medicine? He says, what do you mean? He says, you stole my briefcase. He says, I didn't know that was the medicine. I opened it up looking for money and I didn't see any, so I threw it in the river. He says, you had the cure in your hands and you threw it overboard. So the Chavetz Chaim says, you had the cure. You could have taught your children to listen to the Rabbanim. You could have told them to have respect for Judaism. And you didn't. And now you're in trouble. You come to the rabbis. What can I do? You took the medicine and threw it in the garbage. You taught them not to listen to the rabbis. What can I possibly do for your daughter now? I was speaking at a class. I was giving a class on intermarriage in London. And this one woman stood up and she says, I am intermarried. And I see my children growing. I said, well, it goes by the mother. So my children will really be Jewish, and I'll bring them up in Jewish. I'll bring them to my parents for Friday night, But I see my children growing non-Jewish before my eyes, and I don't know what to do. And I came here tonight looking for solutions, and I'm not hearing any. I said, look, if you want me to tell you how to live a meaningful Jewish life when you're intermarried, I don't know how. That's the whole purpose of my talk. I don't know how to do that. So this couple stood up in their 50s, well-dressed, and they said, I'd like to say something to this young lady. Says, we're Egyptian. And among Sephardic Judaism, intermarriage is just the worst possible thing you can imagine. And my daughter came home from university, and she says, I'm getting married to this boy. He's not Jewish. And we said to her, how could you intermarry? You know what Judaism means to us. And she said, yeah, nothing. You don't keep Shabbos. You don't keep kosher. All of a sudden, when I'm ready to get married, you suddenly remember that you're Jewish? You're not going to be a Jew on my back. You want to be a Jew? Go be a Jew. And we realized that our daughter was right. And so we came here to start taking classes, because in case our daughter ever wants to come back, we want to show them that we're willing to live a Jewish life. If you're not an Anav, if you're not humble, if you don't approach Torah with a sense of, wow, this is God talking. These are the sages talking. The Gemara says, if your Rebbe is like a malach, an angel, then you're a person. But if your Rebbe is a person, then you're an animal. Because your Rebbe always has to be higher than you. So if it's just Rabbi Bob, who you play racquetball with, then you're going to have to be an animal. But if he's a malach, then you can talk about you being a person. Because this is somebody who can lead you. That's why you find this strange expression sometimes in the Gemara where someone asks another person a question and he says, I'll answer you if you carry my towel to the bathhouse. That's a strange thing to say. That's a sign of avdus. That means I'm a slave. It's one of the things you're not allowed to ask a Jewish slave to do for you is carry your towel to the bathhouse because it's demeaning. He said, I'll only answer your question. He says, because I can see by the way that you asked the question that you're not taking it seriously. So I'll give you an answer and you'll be like, nah. Very hard. Very hard with a person who's already decided that they know everything. I always love that expression. No one can prove to me there's a God. Go ahead. I'm like, nope, I believe you. No one's going to prove. No, go ahead and try. I said, what for? Whatever I say, you've already told me you're not going to be convinced. So why should I knock myself out? I believe you. You're completely closed-minded. There's nothing that I say is going to impress upon you. Because you don't have the humility to be able to look at things objectively and decide, gee, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's another point of view here. So in order to be able to be Konei Torah, you have to start with anava. You have to have a sense of humility. And when we live in a generation where everybody, can go on to, TikTok or Facebook or, start spouting any nonsense they want and get 1 million people to follow them and suddenly become important and they feel that they're an influencer. So then who's going to have the humility to stop and listen to somebody who knows more than them to be able to instruct them? And that brings us to the question and answer portion of our program, and we have a sponsor for it. Thank you so much for letting me and my friend Nachman come visit the show live. It's my pleasure. By the way, anybody who's going to be in Israel or is in Israel and wants to be part of the audience, so first of all, you have to make sure that you clap on cue. Otherwise it's just like embarrassing. Just saying there. Anyway, so they were very good. And they came to watch. Anybody who wants to, just reach out. Wishing you much hatzlacha, Meir Weiss. P.S. Shout out to Snaps in Lakewood, New Jersey. Snaps in Lakewood, New Jersey is a all service kind of restaurant with all kinds of different fancy stuff. My son, Shlomo, who you saw doing the Chol Moed podcast from Shlomo's Meat, it was one of the few places he went to that he was impressed with. And he says, I can't wait till we, go back to America so I can go to Snaps. So there's a shout out. Okay. What is a good way to spend your time in the bathroom? The best way to spend your time in the bathroom is exactly what the bathroom is for. For my English people, they mean toilet. In England, they have a bathroom, which has the bath, and they have a toilet, which has the toilet. We in Lushan in America, we call them both the bathroom. A friend of mine married a girl from England, and he says to him, where's the bathroom? He goes, why, you're going to take a shower? So he's like, no, he goes, oh, you mean the toilet? What's the best way to spend it? The best way to spend it is exactly what the toilet is meant for. That's the way to spend your time there. Do not linger. Yeah. But assuming you are of a certain age where natural functions do not come as easy to you as they may have once upon a time, and you need more time to get your business done. Yeah. So a lot of it has to do with what kind of a person you are. I have finished many classic novels in the bathroom. I remember I was giving a shiur once, and I quoted a passage from a particular book that I had read in the bathroom, and I may have mentioned that this is part of my bathroom reading. And a guy told me, he says, my wife came on and said, I know he was telling the truth because the place mark was a piece of toilet tissue. So the best thing to do is read the classics because you're not going to get stuck there. It's not like it's going to be so engaging that you can't get out. That's how I got through most of Dickens. Books on science, books on history, somebody said once, my father looked at the bathroom as his college of continuing education. He would go in there with different books. So you don't want to take anything that's going to be too engaging, In fact, there's a series of books called The Bathroom Reader, which have a whole bunch of different articles. And it says this is for short. This is for, if you have a longer stay, they're set up by the length of the article. He says, and this is for a truly leg-numbing experience. But, there are certain things. There was a particular Jewish newspaper where somebody asked a Shiloh once, are you allowed to bring it into the bathroom? And someone said, the question is if you're allowed to take it out. Anyway, so that's my take on that. Benny Malik, what is your opinion about bungalow marriages where the husband stays home while the wives are out partying in the mountain? Or maybe it's the opposite. So, full disclosure, okay? I never went to a bungalow. Thank God we weren't poor. We had a nice house in Long Island with central air conditioning. The idea of going and living in a little hut like a refugee, where someone's going to sleep in the kitchen, and all the women are forced to sit in a circle all day and talk, and the big adventure out is going to Walmart at 3:00 in the morning. There's nothing about the bungalow experience that I found attractive. One time, my good friend Yankee Yarmish, who had a bungalow, he lent it to our family for a month in the summer, and we went there. And I remember I called my brother. He goes, where are you? I said, I'm in a bungalow. He says, what are you doing? I said, sitting on the porch, listening to myself sweat. I couldn't understand why anybody does this. But to put into context, there was a time when the city was, of course, unbearably hot and crowded, not a healthy atmosphere for a child. And you go up into the mountains where the air is fresh and clean, and the kids can play outside and like this. It was considered to be a very healthy option for the children. And so the family would get a bungalow, rent a bungalow, buy a bungalow, and go up into these little colonies. And the kids, sometimes they had a day camp. They almost always had a pool. There was at least grass for them to run around in, etc. And it was convenient. But of course, if the husband worked, the commute from the Catskill Mountains down to the city was prohibitive. Best case scenario, the wife stayed in the bungalow, took care of the children, had a little vacation herself. Things were more relaxed. The husband would go to Irgun Shirei Torah. My good friend Rabbi Bald. He says when everybody's away in the bungalows and the men are sitting around, he makes lecture series, shiurim, I should say, not lectures, shiurim, in Williamsburg, Borough Park, and Flatbush. And Flatbush, they're in English, and Borough Park and in Williamsburg, they're in Yiddish. And when I happened to be in America, from time to time, he would ask me to come. Now, he didn't know who I was. He just saw that I wrote for the Hamodia at the time. He had no idea who I was. And I remember I showed up the first time, and the crowds were out the door, literally out the door. They had to put a speaker outside, and the people just keep coming. And he looks at me and says, "Who are you?" He had no idea who I was. Yiddish was his first language, So ideally, the men have a system. They come up for Shabbos and they work. Is it an ideal? Of course, it's not ideal. It's never ideal for a family to be separated. Could I relate to this? The only time my parents slept apart was when my mother was in the hospital having children. My father didn't sleep in the hospital. When my father was in the hospital, my mother slept in the chair next to him. Otherwise, they went on vacation together. They went to work every day together. They came home and had supper together. They were always together. The idea of being apart is a strange idea. Now, I know there are people who take separate vacations, and maybe the mother takes the daughters and the daughter-in-laws and they go off on a vacation. I'm not here to judge. I'm just saying that from my point of view, that's not ideal. Husband and wives should be together. Sometimes when someone gives me a ride, they tell me, you sit up front. I'll put my wife in the back. I said, absolutely not. I don't separate husbands and wives. I said, if you were coming with me, I wouldn't put my wife in the back. She sits up front with me, and you sit with your wife, I'll sit in the back. Sometimes a little tough when I'm sitting in a little infant chair, but hey, the sacrifices we make for marriage. So I definitely respect that idea. Is it the same thing today that it's a imperative for people to go away to the mountains? I don't know. I can't say. I live in Israel. I know that kids who are bored, the devil finds work for idle hands. I know it's not a healthy thing. The problem is that, unfortunately, there are stories of unhealthy things that take place in bungalow colonies. So the only thing I can stress is, when you're looking at a bungalow colony or a vacation home village, make sure you're finding a place that has Yirei Shemayim and people who appreciate the importance of Torah, and that standards are being maintained, and that things are not a hefgewalt. So an outright endorsement, no. But can it sometimes be a necessary good and a sacrifice that a family has to make? Yes. By Anonymous, why is it that every Gemara, which is Torah Sheba'al Peh, has to be printed in the same exact layout, but Chumash, which is Torah Sheba'al can be printed in different layouts? Shouldn't be the opposite. You're laboring under a mistaken assumption. And that is because basically every Gemara that you have seen has the Sansino Shas layout. That is by no means the only Shas. There was the Kelm Shas and the Lublin Shas. There were different Shas that had it set up in different ways. You find when the Rishonim never mention a Daf Gemara, they always mention the Perek of Gemara, because it wasn't a set system. Certainly before printing, even after printing, there were many different ways of printing the Gemaras, and it was not universal that Rashi and Tosfos were on the daf. This was the Vilna Shas that basically put this together, and it's become more or less accepted, but definitely not that there's no other version of the Gemaras. You just haven't seen them. And therefore, after it became more or less standardized, then there's an advantage that Surah Hadaf, because people know where to find things, and everybody's in the same place. So you say, you understand, it would be really hard to do Daf Yomi if everyone has a different Gemara with a different setup. But is it a requirement? Absolutely not. And is it a requirement that every Chumash be printed the same way? Absolutely not. There are many different types of them that have been printed in different kind of ways, and all of it is legit. By Anonymous, does Hashem appreciate creativity when serving him? Like people enjoy things more exciting? Absolutely. Because Baruch Hu made everybody different because everybody has their own unique perspective to bring. It is sad that we live in a society where very often people try to squelch creativity and individual abilities. There was somebody who was a musician, and he asked Rav Hutna if he could play chasanas. And he said, no, it's not a healthy lifestyle for a yeshiva bacher. Stay out late at night, and you'll be tired in the morning. You won't be able to learn. He says, but if you have a talent for music, you're mechuyev to always get the best music teacher you can, so that you are able to master this ability that Hashem gave you. You're not supposed to waste talents, because Baruch Hu gave them to you for a reason. And therefore, the fact that I may have a gift for writing, for speaking, for art, for music, for computer programming, for business, for any of these things, absolutely, you should use these things in your Avodas Hashem. You shouldn't use them not in Avodas Hashem, but you definitely should harness these abilities that the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave you in Avodas Hashem. And that's why people who are artistic and can make charts and graphs and things like that, it's definitely a wonderful thing to be able to do. So yes, embrace the gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you and do not squander them. And that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can sign up for an online share. You can send an email. You can sponsor an episode or a question and answer. You can make a donation. We've had people who just sent in donations not to sponsor an actual episode, but just because they believe in what we're doing and they want to try to support it. You can listen to past shiurim. You can make a comment. You could be part of the community. That's what we're shooting for. That we're not just a shiur or a podcast or a show. We are a community. And that's it for now. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah, anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.